Essentially, what we see with the categorizations of very cold is we don't see any temperatures for any day at all getting above this dark blue line for the cold designation. So we have one stream, which is 1% of the stream samples that we have sampled that were classified as very cold. The next, we have our cold category. There were about 8 streams that showed this designation or would have been classified as this. And so for Granite Creek in 2023, you see this week time frame where there's a couple of days where it did actually blip above this 65 cold mark between the 65 and 74. For our cool streams, like Hewitt Creek, you see there's actually a couple days around about that same time as Granite Creek that we had those temperatures that blipped just above that 75-degree mark. So that would designate Hewitt Creek in this year as a cool water stream. And for the majority of the streams in this watershed that we had temperature loggers in, about 46 or 50% roughly were categorized as warm water. And if you look at this Honey Creek figure here, you see there are several days throughout the summer where those temperatures peaked above that 80-degree mark. Now, I will say the designations are, these are only one time or 1 year of data, essentially with the classifications and reclassifying. The data essentially are going to require multiple years. So I think it's 2 out of 3 non-consecutive years have to be monitored to really designate that stream. So we've been working on those over the last 3 summers and hope to continue a little bit of that in the next couple of summers. So we have those multiple years of data to point to this as a, yes, we can classify this as a cold or a cool water stream. If we look at the map, essentially the distribution across the watershed, I'm going to point out here also that I do not have any points or the full data on 2024 this past summer, just because my move to Tennessee is kind of limited what I can do. But as you can see across the watershed, we had several streams that actually went dry in that warm 2023. So those are designated in gray. If you look over here towards Honey Creek at the bottom of the watershed, we have that Mossy Glen, that very cold water stream, that one single point. And as you can see, there's several cold and cool water streams sporadic throughout the watershed. And so we've been working with maps and other things to determine whether these streams might be cold water based on whether the winter imagery actually has a covered stream or not. And that's a lot of the work that Mike Sipker's doing with his crew. The second line of evidence that we want to use is essentially assessing the fish assemblages or the fish communities there. When we didn't go to every site where we had loggers, just because it's just impossible to sample 80 sites and collect fish at 80 sites. But at each site, we essentially collected multiple pass backpack electrofishing passes where we essentially caught all the fish we could, identified them, counted them, measured, and released all of them. Sometimes we would take the lengths on the game species just for records. I'm going to basically go through the fish data, just broad community level assessment here, no stats again. We sampled 73 sites, and this includes many of those dry sites. Across those 73 sites, we collected just over 20,000 fishes in the last couple of summers. This encompassed 43 distinct or different species across the watershed, so a fairly speciose or diverse watershed as it is. And the species among sites ranged from 0 for those really dry sites to about 22 species at a couple of sites. Just showing the most abundant species across all of our sampling made up of these 7 species listed here. Our big capture was more creek chub and brook stickleback. We didn't separate our stone rollers, and the rest of our fishes, you can see images of what those might look like if you came across those in the field. So high abundances of these 7 top species here. If we look across our watershed and we look at fish diversity, again, this does not include any 2024 data, so there would probably be about 10 to 15 more points on here. Zeros should technically be classified as dry in that gray, but the zeros ultimately mean there was just no fish there because it was dry, not that any fish location we sampled. Every location we actually sampled for fish, we collected some species. I've been 1 species, but we always had some fish there. So as you can see, it's kind of sporadic, but our high species diversity really tends to be in some of these smaller headwater streams, like Brush Creek's pretty diverse habitats there. Also, I'll point out there is a nature reserve here So that kind of helps with having a diverse area there. Focus in on our cold water fishes, which we were really searching for. Of the 2 sculpin species, we only found slimy sculpin at 4 different sites. And we found brook trout at 3 sites and brown trout at 10 different sites. I'm going to show you a map now, essentially, of where those are throughout the watershed. Again, this map does not include any new 2024 data, but as you can see, again, this Brush Creek has a pretty good occurrence of our cold water species that you might find. This Volga rec area here, I'll point out, we have several more samples within this location, and there are a couple of streams within the headwaters here where there have been some cold water fishes detected, mostly because the DNR has been doing some restocking efforts in this watershed. And so we were monitoring and double checking that they were still there, and they were. So we are finding that there are some good sites where temperatures might be good, where the fish assemblages might be good to designate them as cold water streams, but we definitely need a lot more data, and we are only scratching the surface on what we're doing in these streams here. So what do we find so far? Well, we found that there was only about 10% of the streams where we've had temperature loggers in the last couple of years that were considered very cold or cold. Majority of those, about 50%, were actually warm water streams, very diverse, over 20,000 species, very speciose. And then we actually were catching quite a bit of cold water fishes at different sites here. So our future plans, again, I don't have anything definitive as far as figuring out what's the most important factors driving the assemblages at these sites or why we might find cold water species. But ultimately, all this data is going to culminate into one document, hopefully, where we can provide all this data to the Iowa DNR. We're going to merge those temperature and fish data and also some plant data, some cold water plants that might help us more easily classify these streams as being cold water, because if the fish is there and the plant is there, or one or the other there, they're automatically going to get designated as cold water, regardless of whether the temperature's actually been assessed there or not. Our IF funding, we currently have a second round of funding proposal in from the TU DARE group. We're hoping that, barring nothing crazy with what's happening right now and happens, we get extra funding that we can actually move this over to the other 2 watersheds in the Turkey River drainage. I guess I should have mentioned that at the beginning, that the Volga River flows into the Turkey River, and that's really the one that the EPA designated as high potential for recovery. So we're going to move over to Otter Creek and Roberts Creek and do some assessments over the next couple of summers if funding comes through. And then we will move on to trying to really focus on what are those larger scale local or landscape drivers that are going to be important for driving these assemblages and these stream conditions. And with that, I will take any questions that anyone might have. Hopefully I was fine on time there.
Yeah, you're great. We do have time for a couple of questions. If I'll have to relay your question to Rich because he's going to pick it up through here. Kirk.
What were the cold water plant species that you were looking for as indicators?
Okay. So the question was, what plant species were you looking as cold water indicators?
The only one that Sipker told me to be on the lookout for was the water cress. And if it was present, then note that, because then that would designate that automatically as cold water.
Great.
Is the Iowa DNR stocking brook trout in any of the streams in this watershed?
A question was whether Iowa DNR is stocking brook trout in these watersheds.
Yes. Can I go back on my map? Maybe you can still.
Yeah.
Can you see me? Okay.
Yep.
Yes. So there are so right here where this yellow point is, technically there's a giant lake that has been dammed there. And these headwater streams, they have actually, I can't remember if it was 2 or 3 of these streams, they have already restocked some brook trout in these streams. And then if you jump over the ridge here, there's what's called Dutton Cave. It's a preserved area. That stream, Dutton Creek, I assume it's the name, they've also been restocking brook trout there. But as far as the rest of the watershed, I think they're kind of waiting on these assessments. Actually, Willow Creek. There's another smaller stream somewhere in this area by Cox Creek or Doe Creek where they were restocking a few. But other than that, I'm not. That might be a SIPCR question.
Excellent.
Yeah, he's right.
Great.
Right. Caleb says he's right.
Okay. Yes, that was an accurate depiction of this of the stocking.
Perfect.
Uh,
Perfect.
Great. Oh, one more question. Yeah.
Yeah, on the ecological condition score,
Yep.
do any like stream shape factors like width depth ratio play into account?
Okay. I'm assuming did you hear that, Rich?
I did hear that. Yeah.
Oh, okay, great.
I not sure that I think that we will probably include some of those in our larger model when we look at the larger local scale and landscape scale factors. I think we'll usually I'll try to include one or two of those representative metrics and remove the autocorrelated ones. So I assume we will be adding some of those metrics to our larger models later. But as far as the actual classification of cold water, I don't believe, as far as my understanding, and it's very limited understanding of the new protocol, that is not included.
Great. I think that wraps up our time for questions in the room. Rich, thank you so much for doing this remote technology transfer. We really appreciate it, and great work in the Volga. I also hope that we get the funding to do the the extra work. We're waiting on the powers that be.
Okay, well, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me, and you all take care and stay warm up there in the Driftless region.